You're listening to the Values and Leadership Podcast, where business leaders share their stories of purposeful impact and success.
Hello, and welcome to the Values and Leadership Podcast, the podcast for innovative leaders who want to apply new ways of doing things in work to grow themselves, leave a remarkable legacy, and have a purposeful impact in their lives and the lives of others. I am your host, Ahmed Arif. I invite corporate owners, corporate leaders, thought leaders, academics, and advisors who practice participative leadership and love to share their positive life and business experiences, their sense of direction, sense of meaning, and how they challenge their thinking in growing their business and the people around them to their next best stage. Today, we are joined with Dave Pendle. He is a leadership developer, thought leader, and social entrepreneur. He is the founder of Generative, which develops ecosystem leaders. Generative is a startup leadership development social enterprise building on 30 years' work in nonprofit organization with 25 years in intensive personal development and exploration, including 10,000 hours of mindfulness and meditation practice. Dave has founded Generative in order to co-develop ecosystem leaders, educators, and change makers to embody, inhabit, and launch the limitless possibilities of a saner world that works for all. Welcome to the show, Dave.
Thanks very much, Ahmed, for inviting me. I'm very excited to speak about leadership with you.
Great. Dave, you are a great leader who has a vision and who has a mission. And we like to invite leaders like you who are exposed to a lot of experiences in life and who can share positive life experiences of great leaders as well in different areas of life and different industries. And this will be very much enlightening to me and to the listeners as well. So thank you for accepting coming today.
Great.
First of all, leadership. You are focusing very much on leadership. So what do you think is the most underappreciated leadership quality?
The most underappreciated leadership quality is listening. And I believe that I did a dissertation on leadership in my MA 8 years ago. And I couldn't find hardly anything about listening. And I interviewed leadership developers who had unusual ways of developing leadership, and they all prioritize listening. There's levels to listening. So there's levels to it, which I'm not going to explain now, but I'll tell you a story about Michelle Long. Now, Michelle Long is a founder of the Business Alliance of Living Economies. And she went through a journey. She was in a corporate, she was in marketing, and she was asked to, produce literature about the drugs. However, she sometimes was too accurate in describing the pitfalls of the drugs. And in the end, they kept trying to correct her and say, you can't put that in there. We don't want to say this to the public. She decided it was destroying her soul. So she stepped out of that. She traveled around the world. She went to see different countries, recognized how different cultures work. In a way, she was listening to herself first, listening to herself and what was driving her and what inspired her. And she came back to the States, did an MBA, dropped out of the MBA, then founded a dot-com business, and then was looking and seeking, well, how can I have a business that really align a business and develop a business that really aligns with my values, but also works in the community. And then she recognized that entrepreneurs that she found most successful worked locally, and they worked in the local economy, and they understood the local markets. So that was like a factual form of listening that she could see. And then she actually to form the business that is now, like, this was 20 years ago, but to form this business when the internet was new, she went through the phone book and called companies and did a survey. And she called every 3 pages, she called the 9th company down in the phone book. And in doing that, she was asking them, well, not what makes your business successful, but what are you most concerned about? What do you want to most see happen locally? So then she said, well, what if businesses could provide the answer? So there was economic, social, environmental concerns that all these business owners suggested. So she formed this living network. So I think the living part is very important. It's about the local economy. It's about people interacting with each other and know each other, and they know who's creating the products they're buying. So she created a robust living network of businesses. And in doing so, that company and the businesses in that region withstood the crisis of the 2008 financial crisis because they were working together and they were resilient. The mass scale that we have in corporations, we've known through the COVID crisis, has shown how lacking in resilience. So Michelle was listening to her own mission and listening carefully to what gave her most passion. And then when she spoke to businesses, she was saying, well, what's the world you want to create? What's the highest values we can embody? And then she listened to that. And then together, when you engage in the deepest level of listening, you create a transformative output. So it doesn't just change the things you do, but it changed the way you do everything and the way you engage together. So for me, the reason we're not transforming enough in the global circumstances that we're in the planet, it's not enough of this transformative listening is happening together. And that includes listening to the system and what does the system need, not just privatizing and extracting profits without regard to social costs, environmental costs, and people costs in terms of the people that work for you.
Great. And I think Michelle, when in her work, she was not aiming for, as you mentioned, a certain profit to generate out of what she was doing, but she was doing this out of her passion and out of her beliefs and out of her values, as you mentioned, and her belief in a cause that led her to things that realities that's different. But while in the corporate world, there is like outcome goals. They should achieve this number.
Yeah.
And this maybe is this a reason why people in corporate do not listen? Because they don't have time, because they don't thinking outside this outcome KPI?
Yeah. I think, you could say that example, this is what you call downloading. You just listen to what you know and you use what you know and you act on that. So it's like repeating past patterns. Like good businesses adapt. So they drop to another level of listening, which is a factual, use facts to change what you do. But a lot of this stuff around outcomes and stuff is the whole culture of listening is just produced on the evidence you can see. But as we know, culture is an iceberg, and what sits below the ocean is invisible, but it's the mass of the iceberg. So culture is that iceberg. This is why organizations struggle with cultural change, because they're not listening to anything other than the winds on the top of the iceberg. And they don't have the skills and capacities to address the undercurrents that are happening in the business and the corporation.
Great. And I think this leads us to the awareness, which is our second point. Why do you think awareness is a critical leadership quality in today's world?
I think there's a famous founder of, I think it was Hanover Insurance, Bill George, and his articulation of this is that the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the leader. So if the leader is very closed off, very only focused on specific things, and that's why a lot of leadership initiatives change, and specifically change initiatives change, because they're not aware enough of the complexity of the situation. They've got an agenda, they want to change, they don't listen, and then they create change initiatives. I think only 30% of change initiatives have some kind of success. So the interior consciousness of the intervener is really important. I've got an example of the Mr. Chaudary, who is a founder of something called Jaipur Rugs. And he is really interesting because he has a self-inquiry, has a process of self-inquiry. So he inquires is what's tripping me up? What habits are tripping me up? What things have I done unconsciously? how can what has got in my way? And he talks about ego. So he talks about losing his ego. So his daily practice is self-inquiry around losing ego. And in Jaipur Rugs, pressure in developing countries or so-called developing countries is to adopt the Western business model and then to have profits. So for 30 years, he has a business model that's put his own employees and the weavers of his rugs first. And he's put them first. And for 30 years, 25 of those 30 years, people are questioning his business model and whether he could survive. But when he survived the 2008 crash, 5 or 6 years later, people are really interested in his business model and what he's doing. But he really, without that degree of self-awareness and self-inquiry, you can't calibrate the right interventions. So this level of consciousness of lack of investment in ego on his own part. He's a kind of follower of Mahatma Gandhi as well. So he's aware of being the change that you want to be in the world, but also his practice of doing this informs his interventions and also creates a sustainable business where the weavers, who in most of the businesses, we hear a lot about exploitation in developing countries like China, possibly Indonesia, where people are paid almost nothing for 12 hours work a day. He's going in the opposite direction. So he's bucking the trend. And to me, that is deeply linked to his own sense of his own values, but also this ongoing inquiry.
And what was his business model that he was doing that people were challenging him about? What was it?
I think the detail of it, I don't know because I've read about him. But as far as I could see is that he put more emphasis on the welfare and well-being of his employees. So the people that made his rugs, and he probably was paying them more than other people were. So he wasn't going for the excess profit or to maximize profit, as most businesses are run to maximize profit either for the shareholders or the owners. So he wasn't stripping out. So it's potentially higher costs in maintaining his workforce, but then they're a loyal workforce and not exploited because of their dependency on his business model, on his business.
Great. And this shows that when he cares for his employees, it was repaid back to him in the sustainability of the business. Maybe, as you mentioned, he didn't make this higher profits, but he remained for 30 years. He sustained the crisis that maybe great corporation failed, Lehman Brothers failed. But he is a small business, but he survived and he was sustainable in that. So I think he achieved this kind of sweet spot of how to make a balance between profits and sustainability. So I think this is, and he achieved that through caring, when he cared for others. And this is a very, very good point that you arose. And this actually as well fits into our next theme, the caring. Why should corporations and companies care about communities or their employees and not focus exclusively on customers?
Well, I think we're in the mechanistic paradigm of organizations. So the mechanistic metaphor is the world and the universe is a machine. So everything can be sectioned off and levers can be pulled and switches can be made. So complicated things like people should be simpler. In a way, it encourages a simplistic view of humanity and human systems. Now, when the markets and global conditions were stabler, not like they are now in the COVID crisis, having a predictable machine-like model worked because you could do a 5-year plan and you could basically rely upon global conditions of markets and supplies and functioning would be predictable. But now we're in a time of climate change where climate disaster is always on the horizon, and those disasters are accelerating. We've got the exploitation of nature. The karma of that is coming home to roost because of something like COVID. Like this mechanical model exploiting, extracting, and privatizing the commons and the well-being. Well, not the well-being, but the well-being of nature. Therefore, is divorced. So the mechanical model divorces businesses from communities, but they're dependent on education. They're dependent on roads. They're dependent on the social aspects, but they pay very little back in terms of what society supports the businesses. So if you take the instance of Greystones Bakery, who are a very successful brownie bakery in the Yonkers, one of the most socially deprived areas of New York, they bake brownies to hire people. They don't hire people to bake brownies. So they're switching the paradigm. They're also switching the paradigm of recruitment. So in terms of recruitment, they have open hiring. So anybody from the Yonkers or nearby can come and show up, put themselves on the list, and they'll get hired. So they don't do all the interviews, all the job applications, all of this. And people in Yonkers are in some of the most deprived, incredible positions. I've just read of somebody who was 60 years old, never had a full-time job in his life, was recruited, and now has his first full-time job. If that isn't changing the paradigm, and if that isn't saying another form of business is possible, a form of business that puts people first. Now, they invest a lot in their people. They have to because of the lack of social investment in those people. But they're committed. And they're now got an academy where they train other businesses to do this. But you have to absolutely turn your business model upside down. But they're phenomenally successful. I think they've invested something like $30 million in the last 10 years, something like that, in there and paid them. So they're hugely successful, and they care about people, and they invest in people. And for me, with my background in non-profit work, this echoes the work that I did with young adults. We invested time, attention, care, and then their lives could thrive.
This is very interesting business model to hire everyone.
Hire anyone that applies.
Yeah, this is this is the first time I hear this kind of something happening in business. I think if this is a welfare institution, I understand it. But from a business point of view, how can this be possible?
Yeah, well, of course, they have a very structured onboarding experience, and they have to train people to show up. Because if you've got a chaotic history, showing up every day on time has not been a priority. So they have to, all adults go through a 6 to 9 month apprenticeship program, and depending on performing in that and responding to the support, they have to help people with housing. They have to help people with identity. They have to help people with all kinds of things so that the employee is stable. But what they have is fiercely loyal employees that stay for a much, much longer time and contribute much more than you would get in a normal business, because they've invested in their potential, not in the profit, but they've invested in potential out of which the people have profited and the businesses have profited.
This is really a breakthrough business model. And
I'll just add one more point. It also shows how conforming the existing paradigm is around innovation. You can have, this is a radical innovation, and I think a lot more radical innovation is possible and still have a healthy business. But we need more business leaders to be that brave.
Have you more insights about that? Yani, how did hiring more people turned into a profitable business? Do you know more details about that?
Well, as you know, I've been in non-profit, so I haven't studied this in detail. I haven't looked at their accounts or anything. But there's a TED talk, and the gentleman they have a gentleman as part of the Greystones Bakery TED talk by their leader. A gentleman comes on, and he had a criminal background with a drug history, and he's become a foreman, and he's now, tears come to your eyes when you hear about the journey of his transformation. So if you're cynical about humanity, actually a business like this can transform your own cynicism about what's possible.
This is really a very interesting story about a business that can survive through caring and through investing into people, not investing into machines or investing into real estate or something. No, they did something very, while almost established business mentality is saying, no, investment means to invest in productive assets, and employees are not productive assets. We can replace them, and we should not care much about employees.
Exactly.
So
and also the business was found by a Jewish Zen priest. He was a social entrepreneur back in 92. So it took somebody with vision to found it. I mean, he's dead now, but that's where the idea came from.
You mean Greystones?
Yeah.
Great to know that. Great to know about that. Wow, this is very inspiring example. Greystones. I have to dig further about that. It's very interesting how it personalized. And this, what the stories you have mentioned about Greystones, about Jaipur Rugs and Michelle Long. We are here talking about a new form or a new way of leadership. This is not the traditional leadership. I think you name it leadership. How can conditions be designed to give rise to informal leadership like the ones that you have discussed about now?
Well, I subscribe to Ronald Heifetz. He's the kind of Harvard Harvard's business school leadership developer. And leadership is not about position. Commonly and traditionally, you've got a position, you've got leadership. But actually, I see leadership more as a practice. It's something you have to work on every day. A bit like the N.K. Chaudary, the founder of Jaipur Rugs. It's something you have to work and you have to constantly be in a process. So leadership is more, for me, it's more of a practice. Touch on the conditions around leadership. If you're not doing it, you won't be able to adapt. And you won't be able to respond to the things that are demanded of you if you're not working on yourself in this way, because in a way you're keeping yourself flexible by working on yourself. And informal leadership, though, you've interviewed somebody that's putting into practice the work of reinventing organizations of evolutionary purpose, self-management, and I've forgotten the third principle. There's 3 principles. They're putting those into practice. And a lot of that is about self-management. So there's a trend now in progressive companies for self-management. What you need in self-management is a lot of informal and distributed leadership. But I think reinventing organizations doesn't go far enough because it doesn't position itself in the whole system and within which the business is operating. So you can be in tech and you might want to aspire to have some evolutionary purpose about improving your business, but it isn't situated in the world of, diminishing rare materials. If you're in internet telephony, it's not about the rare earth metals or, the impact that your business is having through the consumption of energy. So I think the best sort of informal leadership examples of it, informal leadership arise when the institution itself is looking broader than its own business and its local system and trying to keep it all in one box. It looks at the wider system it's positioned in. And an example of this is a man that I think is Abu Bashir, that was based in South Africa. He worked in Procter & Gamble. He was in a detergent tower. He operated a detergent tower. This tower had an oversight of Soweto, which is the township where millions of people live outside. I think it's Johannesburg, and they live in extreme poverty. This was about 20 years ago. His tower overlooked the town. He knew women there needed to have an improvement in their economic circumstances. And he felt the improvement was to have developed the local economy by developing women's entrepreneurship. So this is a man that's operating more or less a manual mechanical tower in a company, but the company was widening its horizons of its employees. So in his own time, he did a 2-year education and developed himself. The company didn't sponsor, they encouraged this wider vision, but they didn't sponsor or pay for him or give him the time. He did it in his own time, and he set up a social enterprise community in Soweto to develop the women's skills to flourish, get better economically by having their own sources of income and not being dependent on the men. So this is something Carol Sanford calls promises beyond ableness. He could see something that needed happening, but didn't know how to do it. But he wanted to do it. So unless your business model, your systemic model of operating encourages you to widen your horizons, this ability to develop yourself and deliver a promise beyond your own current ability is very limited. Because most, as I was saying, the mechanical model encourages you to silo, to reduce, to confine. But actually the human spirit and people, it doesn't mean you have to take care of everything, but you can liberate people through developing their own leadership capacities by widening their horizons.
Great. And you mentioned he self-management, and he was even trying to empower women so they are not depending on men. So from his belief in something, he empowered others as well to have this kind of autonomy in their lives and not be dependent. And this is very in line with his view in life.
I think actually when humans are liberated for their vision, they all want to do that. It's these sort of notions of heroic leadership and these notions of fighting and battle or whatever. In a way, these are outmoded now. And I think there's an impulse to do good. If there's enough support structure around it, humans will tend to go in that direction.
Great. And just now you mentioned the name of Carol Sanford, and she had a radical view about the current business model, why it is not adaptive to the current world we are living in. So can you give us insights about that?
So Carol Sanford is a pretty unique person because she's actually, through her own developed her own model. And the model that she creates is based on living systems. So how do living systems operate? And the business model, which includes this promises beyond ableness I mentioned with the other gentleman, she comes in and she's not an expert. She doesn't claim expertise. She also is not a consultant. And what she does is just ask questions. So she comes in and stands alongside you. She doesn't claim to be an authority or a teacher or an expert. So this is changing the paradigm of knowledge upside down. Because the current paradigm of knowledge depends on you accumulating knowledge, gaining expertise, and selling it. Because what she does is liberate the living intelligence in the system itself. So humans have a lived experience and intelligence of the system they're working in, and also do the managers. So what she does is liberate the energy that is normally constricted by these mechanical systems, and liberates the living wisdom and intelligence in human systems, but also aligns with those of natural systems. I'm sure you know a little bit about science. So actually, we're all a holarchy of wholes. So we're electrons, microns, molecules, elements, and compounds, and organic chemistry. And all of these things, we're also a hierarchy of cells, holarchy of cells, organs, heart. All of these things are nested wholeness. So living systems operate on wholeness. So unless your organization is working with wholeness, and this is why I feel that living organizations designed on living systems are going to be better able to adapt, because there's something intrinsic in the universe around wholeness. So of multiple wholes, of levels of complexity. So the current existing paradigms tries to reduce complexity rather than thrive in complexity and respond to complexity. And also, if you, I heard Carol speak about her own approach, and in this COVID moment, she is thriving in uncertainty because actually the whole nature of the universe is uncertain. Even at the quantum level, there's a huge degree of uncertainty. So in fact, by aligning and being comfortable or thrilled by uncertainty, you're actually also upturning the kind of mechanistic paradigm. So moving more aligned with living systems and wholeness.
What you're saying about Carol, she made a huge thing. She focused on the intrinsic of the people. She believes in the talents, and she is liberating them, and she is doing that by asking questions, not claiming to be an expert. Some people think that they should be experts to say something. No, you can do something with whatever you have, and you can make a change, irrespective of your academic or irrespective of your accreditation or whatever. You can do something. And the example that you mentioned of the gentleman from South Africa, Bashir, it's very, very inspiring as well.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you, Dave, for all the insights that you bring today for us to be informal leaders, irrespective of our position, irrespective of our expertise, irrespective of our accreditation. It was really inspiring episode, inspiring interview, and definitely we have to think about making it again, a prolonged timing. Thank you, Dave, for your insights and contribution.
Well, thanks for inviting me, and I want to wish you every success in your own transformation, and also to your listeners. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you.